Hello everybody, welcome back to Anglo Election Insights, where I am completing the final instalment of my preview of the 2025 Australian federal election, and we're finishing the wrap-up of New South Wales in Western Sydney, which is an electoral battleground that sort of has it all, or at least it's very much at the centre of the tussle between the Liberal and Labor parties in terms of the ongoing electoral realignment. And I think while it doesn't have a big swath of marginal seats in the way that, say, the Hunter and the Central Coast does, what it does have is, or what it does provide is a theatre for the movements that the polling and the demographics has been hinting at. I think Western Sydney is ground zero for will it actually play out at the polls. So we're going to jump straight in. This is the electoral history of Western Sydney, and as you can see, it looks pretty red. Watson and Blacksland, safe Labor seats, no other way to describe them. Parramatta, held over this entire period by the one MP who took it over from Ross Cameron, but never quite put it off the map. Greenway, Lindsay, perhaps slightly more aspirational, you might say. Michelle Rowland has done a really good job making Greenway a little bit safer for the Labor Party, whereas in Lindsay, the trend's gone the other way. Liberals are pretty firmly entrenched there now, out in Penrith. McMahon, much poorer seat, sort of based around Mount Druitt and those sort of suburbs, a lot of housing commission, that sort of thing. Still pretty safe for Labor. Fowler, shock result in 2022, Labor completely stuffing up pre-selection. Now it's an independent seat. And then Werriwa, formerly a heartland Labor seat. Bit of a scare in 2013, and slowly drifting towards the Liberal Party. And a very key battleground at this time round. And as you can see on the map, in the good years, Liberals making slight incisions, circling like wolves, but in the bad years, Labor just fully dominant in Western Sydney. We can do a sort of broad regional profile here. While there is some pretty serious density to more inner west or inner southwest Sydney, as you go out, you get to these growth corridors where we have mortgage stress and we have increasingly poor local amenity, particularly in the brand new developments. A lot of these seats are ethnically very diverse. South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East highly represented in terms of cultural heritage. These seats on the whole are socially conservative. So while they vote Labor, perhaps out of economic interests more so than anything else, when the people of these electorates are presented with the option to support a purely socially progressive agenda, they haven't, in the case of both same-sex marriage plebiscite and the voice referendum. And these are younger households, particularly young families, lots of children, and lots of sort of 30 to 40-year-olds as well. So the key seats, we're going to begin with Watson. So it would normally be a key seat, held by Tony Burke, long-time Labor frontbencher. It's very diverse, one of the highest concentrations of Muslims of any seat in the country, very low socio-economic area as well. This seat is one of the test cases for the success of the Muslim vote, which are trying to build on their success in the UK by endorsing independent candidates in areas of high Muslim populations. And they've got one running, although I think he's a little bit of a one-trick pony. I think he's pretty much solely focused on the Gaza issue. I don't think he's that well organised, and I think he'll struggle to receive preferences from, say, the Liberals. So he might not be as much of a threat, but if that sort of Muslim vote, I suppose, is quite sort of tightly concentrated behind this guy, he could pose a significant threat, because that would take a lot of primary from Labor as well. As you can see, there's plenty of it to go around. Tony Burke winning a majority last time. Next door in Blaxland, again another front bencher, Jason Clare, quite a popular MP, Education Minister. Safe Labor seat, again, very diverse electorate, high Islamic population, and it's quite a young demographic here. Again, another Muslim vote endorsed independent, but this time, this guy's he's got a bit more to him. He's already been elected to council late last year. He runs a pharmacy. He's very well connected, big army of volunteers, and a much broader policy platform. If you go on his website, it almost reads like a teal. The focus on local representation and amenities and services, and that sort of fair go for the electorate type language that you're seeing in a lot of these seats, like Cowper and Wannon, for example. It makes me think that he's perhaps slightly more moderate. He might appeal to Liberal voters in terms of preferences. He might appeal more to the Greens as well. And he might be a more serious threat to Labor's primary. We shall see. Last time round, Jason Clare winning a pretty big thumping majority. Parramatta. So this is one of the rare marginal seats in Western Sydney. It's been marginal for a long time, but Labor have held onto it through thick and thin so far this century, with the exception of Ross Cameron right at the start under Howard. We have another diverse electorate, but it's more of a hub for Indian Australians than say Southeast Asians or Muslims. Its margin makes it quite attractive to the Liberals. My assumption is that we're probably going to see something like a broad swing of sort of 4 to 5, maybe 6% across Western Sydney more broadly, which would be enough to deliver Parramatta. But the landscape of Parramatta itself is changing. There's actually a lot of public servants there now, and it skews a little bit younger, a lot of millennials. So it's probably not really the same electorate that Ross Cameron was able to win for the Liberals back in the late 90s. But having been marginal for so long, with the sitting MP maybe not as popular and as active as some of the other local MPs, it could absolutely be under threat. As we can see here, he actually suffered a significant primary swing against him. He was taking over from a long time, quite popular local MP, and there were concerns about the late pre-selection. He was sort of installed as a captain's pick, didn't really have local support. So those issues won't be there this time, but whether or not the electorate has warmed to him, that's another question. Greenway, sort of perched between Blacktown and the Hills. This is a key sort of mortgage belt area. It was a marginal seat, had its boundaries redrawn a few times, once quite favourably to the Liberals, which allowed them to hold it in 2007, but then more in favour of Labor at the next redistribution. And since then, Michelle Rowland has been able to strengthen her hold on this seat, turning it into a safe Labor seat last election, but another redistribution has wiped a little bit off her margin, bringing it down to 8%. Again, pretty high Indian population. As I said, it's a mortgage belt area with some signs of mortgage stress right at the top and the bottom of the electorate. A lot of young families. Speaking of Michelle Rowland, as far as I'm aware, she's quite a popular local MP, but this term on the front bench, she has been the face of some reasonably unpopular sort of legislation around her communications portfolio. You might have heard of the Misinformation Bill or the MAD Bill. A lot of community backlash. Whether that has any impact locally, I'm not sure, but it's there. As we can see, she's almost winning a majority on the old boundaries back in 2022. Fowler, the seat that Labor handed to Dai Lee through a disastrous pre-selection process where, in order to try and balance the factional weighting and a problem that appeared in the Senate, they parachuted Christina Keneally all the way from the Northern Beaches out into a very diverse electorate of Fowler, with notable Arabic and particularly Vietnamese enclaves. And the backlash was such that Daly was able to take the seat on just under 30% of the vote, with Labor's vote collapsing 18.5%. The question is, can they win it back? The answer is probably not. Werriwa. This is sort of the climax of Western Sydney, held on a 5.3% margin, sort of within that general swing that I'm predicting. Outer southwest, this is former safe Labor seat. It's boasted MPs such as Gough Whitlam, Mark Latham, but it's slowly drifting towards the Liberals. Again, very diverse, very fast-growing area. This is the epitome of a growth corridor. Poor infrastructure, a lot of mortgage stress in this sort of area, and a lot of young families. And to boot, the local MP, not really that popular, not that active, not that engaging. So, certainly the type of seat that could fall. And particularly when looking at this 2022 result, you can see the Lib Dems, UAP, One Nation, really strong primary votes. And if that was to repeat and the preferences were to flow a little bit more strongly to Sam Cale, who I believe is running again, that could pose a problem to Labor, particularly if their primary vote drops, which, according to the MRP polling that we'll have a look at, has been. Speaking of polling, as we've seen with the other Sydney videos, only a small swing towards the coalition being predicted based on the national and statewide polls. But if ever there was a place in New South Wales that was going to swing a little bit more harder to the Liberals, I would think it's Western Sydney. So I threw a few extra seats into my MRP matrix this time. I really wanted to try and prove that there was some sort of observable trend here, some data points that really supported my thesis that the swing is on a little bit harder here. And we'll go through them. Watson and Blaxland. Similar types of seats. Have a look at what's happening to the Liberal primary in both of them. 29 to 38, 29 to 35. Those seats are probably not going to play out that way because the independents are going to be they're going to have a much bigger impact than those prior waves of MRP have credited them with. But it's interesting to see what's happening to the primary votes. The last wave of MRP actually had the Liberals within 4% on two-party preferred. And that's on 2022 preference flows. Unheard of. It'd be crazy if that happened on the night. Parramatta. Look at this inversion of the primary vote. Liberals going from 6% behind to 4% in front. The Green vote keeping Labor ahead. But the trend. McMahon. Still pretty safe for Chris Bowen, but again, the trend. Look at the Liberal vote. Look at the Labor primary. Greenway, same thing. Liberals going ahead on primary vote. Chifley. Liberals going up, Labor down 5%. Still safe, but that trend, it's there all the time. Lindsay, already a pretty safe Liberal seat. Nothing really happening. Fowler, look what's happening to the Labor primary here, from 36 down to 22. And Werriwa, again, look at the inversion of the primary votes. Liberal behind, Liberal pulling ahead. So you can see across the entirety of this region, that trend is on. It'll be really interesting to see the final wave of MRP that we hopefully get before the election. So for my predictions, Blaxland, I have Jason Clare retaining this seat for Labor by a close margin, only 3% against the independent. I believe he'll make the final two candidate preferred. Whereas in Watson, I have this as a stronger retain for Tony Burke because I think it'll be the LNB in the final count rather than the independent. I could be wrong. Could absolutely be wrong. But even if I am, I'm not sure that the Watson independent is going to receive good preference flow from the Liberals. So either way, I don't think it's going to be that close. Parramatta, I could certainly see this one going either way. But with that general swing, with sort of question marks around the popularity of the local member, I think the Liberals have a slight edge here. Greenway, ALP retaining. Michelle Rowland's personal vote is enough to carry this seat. And there's a degree of affluence in Greenway that's not perhaps present so much in Chifley that should probably limit the swing to the Liberals as well. Speaking of Chifley, bigger swing, 8% I'm predicting. But the ALP will hold that seat. McMahon, Chris Bowen will be put on notice, but not displaced. Lindsay, safe retain for the Liberals. Fowler, bit hard to say what the final margin will be. Labor has actually endorsed the candidate from 2022 that was locally pre-selected before Keneally came in. So she gets a chance to prove if she's popular enough with the local electorate, but I just really don't think this Labor government's done enough to convince voters that they should be backing her over Diley, who's very well locally connected and who I think appeals to both sides of the aisle. And then finally in Werriwa, I can't decide. Like Bruce, it's a toss-up. This is a seat that could absolutely go either way on the night, and I'm sort of unable to discern which party has the edge here. And that's how it looks. The story of the night being not so much big Liberal gains, but new marginal seats in Sydney's West. It becomes a new battleground, particularly if we have a scenario where Labor forms government again in 2025, and either we're back at the polls soon after because it's a dysfunctional minority government, or their woes continue and 2028 becomes another decent cycle for the Liberals. We could see further swings that actually take out some of these seats. And then, Western Sydney becomes a sort of generational battleground for future elections. Guys, we did it. We've covered, with the exception of the uncompetitive ACT, we've covered every state and every sort of important sub-region of every state in our preview of the upcoming federal election. Thank you for coming along the journey with me. We passed 500 subscribers just yesterday. This channel's growing much faster than I ever thought it would. So thank you so much for watching the videos and commenting. I will do one last video in this series, just wrapping up my findings, revealing the final tally based on my predictions and just any revisions or any final thoughts that I have. But again, a big thank you to all the viewers. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And as always, comment your thoughts below. I learned so much off you guys, particularly if you're local to the area that I'm covering and you give me new insight into the local MPs or just certain niche issues that are cropping up that might influence the vote and are hard to discern from a distance. So thank you everyone. Have a great day and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.